faithfully sharing value and interpreting great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally's Book Talk. When we talk about freedom, different people often have different understandings. Students might think that not having classes is freedom. Office workers might think that not going to the office is freedom. Setting aside these specific differences, we usually agree that freedom means being unconstrained. However, one philosopher argued that without constraints, there is no freedom. He is the culmination of German classical philosophy. In his book, The Philosophy of Right, Hegel thoroughly analyzed what freedom truly is and how we can achieve it. Before discussing this book, let's briefly introduce Hegel. Born in 1770 in Stuttgart, Germany, into a civil servant family, he received formal education from a young age. At 18, Hegel entered the famous Tübingen Seminary for university. There he became university roommates with Schelling and Hölderlin. All three roommates later became important figures in German intellectual circles. After graduating from university, Hegel didn't immediately enter academia. Instead, he worked as a tutor for some officers and wealthy merchants. This experience greatly broadened his social experiences. At the age of 31, Hegel came to the University of Jena, quickly earned his doctorate, and became a lecturer there. A few years later, with the recommendation of the great writers Goethe and Schiller, Hegel became a full professor. In 1818, Hegel moved to the University of Berlin, which at the time was like our Peking University. During his time there, he started a course called Philosophy of Right, and more students attended it, making it a popular elective. For convenience in teaching, Hegel compiled and published his lecture outlines, incorporating students' notes, thus creating this book, The Philosophy of Right. Up until his death, Hegel was still teaching this course, so this book is often regarded as Hegel's most mature work, and The Philosophy of Right was highly acclaimed. Um, Besides Hegel's excellent teaching, there's also a crucial historical background. The outbreak of the French Revolution in 1789. The shock the French Revolution brought to Europeans was undoubtedly immense, starting as an anti-feudal revolution, waving the banner of freedom, but eventually turning into a terrifying and bloody guillotine frenzy. This was the impression Europeans had of the French Revolution at the time, and thus philosophers began to reflect on where this great revolution went wrong. Is it really wrong for us to pursue freedom? Hegel lived in conservative Prussia, yet strongly supported the French Revolution. During university, he and his classmates planted a liberty tree to show solidarity with the French people's struggle. After joining the University of Berlin, he would even take students to drink champagne on the anniversary of the storming of the Bastille. And in his view, freedom is the destiny of modern people. That part isn't wrong. But where the French Revolution erred was in ignoring that freedom's realization requires broader contextual support. With this background understood, we can discuss the origin of the book's title. The philosophy of right here isn't about legal statutes. It's a philosophy of freedom. Hegel always maintained that freedom must combine with structures to be meaningful. Otherwise, it leads to chaos, like in the French Revolution. Therefore, broadly speaking, the elements of the philosophy of right is essentially the elements of the philosophy of freedom. The textual structure of elements of the philosophy of right is also quite distinctive and worth noting. It consists of three main parts: abstract right, morality, and ethical life. These three parts progress sequentially from lower to higher levels, starting from individual freedom to humanity's collective destiny, with each major section continuing this triadic progression. Some listeners might know Hegel had a philosophical method called dialectics. This tripartite, progressively layered writing style is deeply influenced by dialectics. With dialectics incorporated, the book's conceptual breadth and philosophical depth are truly remarkable. Today's overview of this framework will strive to reveal the core of Hegel's thought. All right, let's first examine the initial part of elements of the philosophy of right, namely abstract right. This section discusses modern society's foundation, that humans are born free. Simply put, this innate freedom means the liberty to do whatever one desires. This starting point grants modern people nearly limitless possibilities. Modern people might take humans born free as self-evident, but early modern Western thinkers carefully examined this notion. For example, the 17th century English philosopher Hobbes believed that, in the state of nature, humans exist in anarchy, driven by survival instincts to do anything necessary. Such freedom is humanity's inherent natural right. This freedom has only one fundamental limitation: recognizing others possess the same liberty. Apart from that, you can do whatever you want with no specific restrictions. From this perspective, Hegel described this freedom as abstract. To realize abstract freedom requires institutional designs. This is what's called abstract right. In the abstract right stage, Hegel covered three elements. First, property rights. Second, contracts. Third, punishment. First, let's discuss property rights. The relationship between private property and individual freedom is quite straightforward. We often say someone has achieved financial freedom, meaning they possess sufficient wealth to no longer worry about basic needs and can freely choose their lifestyle without compromise. Therefore, we say they are free. Conversely, if you claim to have money to spend freely but it could be confiscated instantly, you actually enjoy no freedom. In feudal Europe, commoners depended on lords, meaning their property could be seized any time. Bourgeois revolutions persisted precisely to abolish this feudal system and secure private property rights. Second is contracts. Property rights guarantee my freedom to consume goods. But if I can't exchange possessions with others, this freedom feels incomplete. Thus, to actualize freedom, we need to establish contracts. What is a contract? Simply put, it's an exchange of objects between individuals based on mutual self-interest. Note that contracts can only involve objects, not people. Entering a contract is an exchange of interests. Therefore, Hegel strongly emphasized marriage must never be viewed as a contract, or its essence would be distorted. More importantly, contracts signify the respect of personhood. For instance, no one signs contracts with animals or the insane, as both parties must have equal legal standing. By forming contracts with others, my personhood gains recognition. Where there is respect from others, there can also be disrespect, such as theft, fraud, or even unlawful confinement. Hegel collectively termed these phenomena as wrong, Unrecht, essentially violations of freedom. To counter such violations, we need the third part of abstract right: punishment. What's the relationship between freedom and punishment? First, punishing unlawful acts genuinely safeguards freedom, preventing it from becoming an empty promise. Imagine a society that claims to protect private property while thieves and robbers run rampant without punishment. Then living in such society, there's simply no freedom to speak of. Secondly, punishment isn't about revenge, but about correcting wrongdoers. Ancient people believed in retaliating eye for eye against violations, but this perpetuates endless cycles of hatred across generations. In modern society, punishment is administered by public institutions. It no longer represents revenge, but serves as corrective measure to restore wrongdoers into free individuals. This respects their personhood. From another perspective, it can also be seen as compelling them toward freedom. All right, let's summarize the first part of the philosophy of right. At the abstract right stage, humans possess the freedom to do whatever they want. In social life, this freedom manifests as property rights. Through exchanging private property, people's freedom gains mutual respect. But since anything goes, some may disrespect others' freedom. Hence, we need punishment to sanction wrongdoing and restore freedom. To many, the freedom in abstract right seems sufficiently complete. But for Hegel, this is merely the foundational layer. Doing whatever one wants isn't true freedom. People refrain from this conduct only due to fear of external punishment. Only by actively choosing to respect others and voluntarily follow morality can it be called freedom. Thus, the philosophy of right advances to the second part, morality. In this section, Hegel explains what truly constitutes freedom through three aspects: These three levels are purpose, intention, and the good. First, let's examine the initial condition for free action, purpose. With purpose comes accountability for consequences, thus generating responsibility. For example, when a robber points a gun at a bank teller's head demanding the safe combination. In this case, even if the teller reveals the code, they won't be held responsible afterward. Because everyone understands the teller acted under duress in that situation. It wasn't done with purpose. Conversely, if an action is done unintentionally, it doesn't qualify as a free act. The simplest example, if we accidentally bump into a door and close it, essentially that's no different from wind blowing it shut. Both are random events, not free actions. But the second condition for free action is spontaneous intention. Hegel believed that when free people act, they must not only know what they're doing, but why, understanding how it benefits them. Let's use crossing the street as an example. As kids, parents teach us to look both ways before crossing to check for traffic. When parents aren't around, we might just dash across recklessly. But as adults, we look both ways, regardless of whether parents are present. Because through reflection, we understand their advice protects us. It benefits us. The same constraint, for children it's external compulsion, making cautious crossing feel unfree. For adults, this constraint becomes self-endorsed, turning into conscious action. From being told to do it to choosing to do it ourselves, constraint transforms into freedom. The third condition for freedom is the good. The third condition is the good, meaning the benefit must be objectified and socially recognized. Simply put, what everyone considers good is truly good. For example, no country recognizes the freedom to use drugs. Someone might argue, I fully know drugs harm health, but I believe the momentary pleasure outweighs long-term physical well-being. Ultimately, as an adult, how I use my body shouldn't concern others. That's my freedom. So what's wrong with this argument? Why isn't drug use considered freedom? The reason is that pleasure from drugs lacks social recognition. This so-called pleasure isn't socially validated. People believe long-term health holds real benefit and goodness compared to fleeting pleasure. Therefore, freedom must be intrinsically linked to the good. Now let's summarize part 2 of the philosophy of right. In the earlier abstract right phase, so-called freedom meant liberty to do whatever one wants. But Hegel believes that actively accepting moral constraints makes one freer than acting recklessly. At this point, our actions no longer follow random desires but are reasoned, knowing why it's good, and we don't need others constantly reminding us or external force to be free. However, Hegel's exploration of freedom doesn't stop there. We follow moral principles or act according to the idea of the good. This is certainly free, but as we know, principles are super abstract and can lead to all kinds of interpretations, which might cause even worse conflicts. Let's picture a simple case. Most societies agree that preserving family life is a good, and respecting others' property rights is also a good. But when a mom steals a loaf of bread from a convenience store to keep her kid from starving, in this situation, these two goods clash. And facing this conflict of goods, how should we act? Some might say we should go by conscience, but conscience is invisible and intangible, totally private and subjective. So, to solve conflicts in objective moral laws, we end up back at arbitrary subjective judgments. As discussed earlier, the conflict of goods was also why the French Revolution turned tragic. Liberty, equality, fraternity were the core values of the French Revolution, all great and worth pursuing. But the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Different factions interpreted these values differently, couldn't convince each other, acted only on subjective conscience. Disconfidence, discomfit, making the guillotine's bloody terror the French Revolution's brightest symbol. So how do we resolve moral conflicts? Hegel might say, don't side with the mom or the store. It's not an either-or thing. The key is what social conditions forced her to steal bread to feed her kid. And that's
When moral laws conflict and leave folks lost, it's likely not the morals at fault, but society itself.
from this idea, Elements of the Philosophy of Right moves from Part 2 to Part 3. Personal freedom needs a free, bigger environment to fully unfold. The state and society are not obstacles to personal freedom. Instead, they are its support. This involves complex human relationships, sentiments, political systems, and historical customs, which is why Hegel calls it ethical life.
Philosophers before Hegel discussed freedom only up to the moral level, but this is where Hegel stands out. And
He carefully considered the environment that supports the realization of freedom, namely family, civil society, society, and the state. Let's start with family. Hegel believes that family teaches people freedom. In modern society, people often have two extreme attitudes toward family and personal freedom. The first view holds that the foundation of family is marriage, which is nothing but a contract signed by two people. Essentially, establishing a family is no different from forming a business partnership. The second view believes that family often holds one back and is a constraint on one's actions. For Hegel, both of these views are seriously wrong. First, marriage is not a contract but an organic union formed through love between two people. As mentioned earlier, the core of a contract is the exchange of interests. For example, if I exchange an apple for your bread, I gain bread but lose the apple. I remain me and you remain you. In contrast, marriage brings integration. In love, I becomes we. I discover my loneliness and only overcome it through my partner. People often call their spouse their other half, which captures this meaning. Second, family is not a constraint. It helps us step out of our personal bubble, get used to collective life, and treat others' affairs as our own. For instance, a bachelor can live as he pleases. He doesn't need to consider others and can freely buy luxury cars or watches if financially able. So, in But a married man can't spend money so recklessly. He has to consider his wife's needs, balance the family budget, and save for his children's better education. In more extreme cases, someone might even sacrifice their life to protect their family. In summary, through the bond of love, two independent individuals form a larger whole, the family. Within the family, people overcome selfish tendencies and actively consider others' interests. However, some shortcomings in the family prevent it from satisfying higher levels of freedom. First, the family is a very small collective. Once a member dies or leaves, it quickly disintegrates, especially in modern society. Second, as the most basic economic unit, it can't fulfill broader human needs like making friends, doing business, or participating in politics. Finally, minors and families remain dependent on parents. Without leaving the family, they can hardly be considered free. Thus, family is merely a starting point. Upon adulthood, one moves to the second stage, civil society. So what is Hegel's concept of civil society? It's a space allowing free pursuit of desires and serves as the bridge connecting family and state. But historically, civil society is entirely a feature of the modern world. Specifically, civil society also has three components. First, the system of needs. Second is the administration of justice. And third is police and corporations. Let's examine each, starting with civil society's core. The system of needs. In modern society, large-scale social division of labor dismantles self-sufficient production. We need rice, but can't grow it ourselves. We buy from farmers. Farmers need fertilizer, but don't produce it. They buy from chemical plants. Chemical plants need phosphate rock, but don't mine it. They buy from mining companies. These interlocking demands create massive supply and exchange chains. This vast supply-demand network is what Hegel termed the system of needs. In contemporary terms, it's essentially a free trade market. First, it provides a sense of freedom by offering a platform to acquire desired goods. Consider 2020's Spring Festival COVID outbreak. Cities implemented strict controls, halting free markets, making routine online shopping and delivery suddenly inaccessible. The unfreedom felt came not just from home confinement, but from disrupted commerce.
Another feature of free markets is that they start from human selfishness, yet ultimately enable large-scale cooperation.
Scottish economist Adam Smith once proposed that free markets operate through an invisible hand. For instance, farmers growing rice don't expect that particular bag to reach me, nor do fertilizer factories tailor products for specific farmers. From this perspective, everyone engages in production while ultimately serving anonymous mass consumers. Hegel greatly admired Adam Smith's analysis. Subjectively, people join free markets to satisfy personal desires faster, but objectively, people end up mutually benefiting and serving strangers. Now, we know the system of needs is civil society's core part, but where interests exchange, conflicts arise, requiring dispute resolution. Thus, the second part of civil society is the administration of justice. This specifically refers to law in the narrow sense. First, laws shouldn't be made arbitrarily. They should compile a nation's accumulated customs over time. Second, laws must be publicly announced. No secret legislation, and trials should be open, resolving conflicts while safeguarding freedom as impartial third party. But legal methods only resolve disputes piecemeal through scattered cases. The judicial approach essentially treats symptoms, not root causes. Thus, Hegel proposed civil society's third part, police and corporations to fundamentally resolve social disharmony. Hegel's police includes both law enforcement maintaining order and public services like business regulation, health supervision, even streetlight maintenance, acting as society's protective umbrella. So what exactly are corporations?
In medieval Europe, the guild system prevailed. Workers of same trade formed alliances where members received protection, while non-members faced exclusion.
Hegel believed this ancient system, slightly adapted, functions effectively in modern society. The first role is to prevent excessive loneliness, promoting social interaction and fellowship among people. The second role is to provide a safety net. Once you join a corporation, members support each other through difficulties. To be realistic, this conception of corporations is indeed overly optimistic.
But crucially, Hegel recognized that unchecked capitalism would ultimately cause wealth inequality, create new forms of enslavement, and deprive citizens of freedom.
To solve this, citizen-formed corporations serve as vital supplements. All right, from free markets to laws and grassroots associations, we now understand civil society. However, civil life remains profit-driven, a place valuing money over sentiment. We need a higher force to constrain economic inequalities. Thus, a free state cannot be anarchic. Others view the state as a contractual product where government acts as night watchmen. Hegel disagreed with both views mentioned. Hegel argued the state should be an organic whole emerging from national traditions. This organic state divides into three parts.
First is legislative power held by Parliament, responsible for lawmaking.
Second is executive power held by government, responsible for law enforcement. Third is princely power held by hereditary monarch, embodying state symbolism. Hegel strongly opposed popular sovereignty, deeming it impractical and destabilizing. Conversely, hereditary monarchy maximizes national stability through continuity. Of course, Hegel embraced modernity. His monarch differs from ancient rulers by having minimal actual power, at most approving administrative decrees with ceremonial notations. In this regard, modern British constitutional monarchy resembles Hegel's vision. Thus, from isolated individuals to developed nation-states, a complete system emerges. But Hegel's thinking continues. Internationally, nations resemble independent entities with exchanges and conflicts, necessitating international law. And when conflicts get so intense that even international law can't solve them, nations go to war, and some countries end up swallowed or vanishing. In the long river of history, so-called world history, is pushed forward by these tales of war and peace. Some might say, is Hegel advocating that might makes right? No, not like that. Human individuals evolve from selfishness to morality and even a free state. This is a law of rational development, and it scales up to the national level too. Hegel believed historical development has ups and downs. Autocratic states might thrive temporarily, but at history's end, free states will cover the globe. At the start of Elements of the Philosophy of Right, Hegel wrote this famous line: "What is rational is actual, and what is actual is rational." It's always been controversial, but only by reading the whole book do we get what he really meant. Simply put, this means that rational things eventually show up in historical development, turning into tangible reality you can see and touch. So-called freedom will also become real existence through history's evolution. All right, elements of the philosophy of right. The core content of this book ends right here. Let's review the entire book again. The biggest difference between modern and ancient societies is that the former treats freedom as the most basic starting point. A modern person has freedom to choose their lifestyle, but that's not enough. A free person must also actively choose a moral way of living. To achieve this, just personal effort won't cut it. We need a properly structured state. It should both protect individual freedom and guide people to act spontaneously and correctly. Ultimately, such a rational state might not be visible now, but it'll emerge as the endpoint of historical development. Every classic work of thought often has wildly different interpretations. Elements of the philosophy of right is no exception. Finally, let's briefly discuss the different views people have on this book. The first interpretation is conservative, because among modern political thinkers, few elevate the state's status as high as Hegel did, giving it a bit of a totalitarian vibe, and few seriously argue for monarchy's legitimacy like him.
Plus, his close ties with the Prussian government meant that for a long time, elements of the philosophy of right was seen as opposing social progress with heavy conservative undertones.
The second interpretation is more positive. In contemporary times, more scholars are setting aside biases and valuing this philosophy of right. They find Hegel's diagnosis of modern society deeply insightful, especially regarding the unchecked expansion of individual freedom. Indeed, this strains relationships between individuals and the state, making Hegel's emphasis on social community exceptionally valuable. Finally, Marx had profound ties to this work. Throughout his life, he remained an admirer of Hegel's philosophy, even declaring himself Hegel's disciple in Das Kapital. But young Marx wasn't blindly reverent. While studying the philosophy of right intensely, he critically engaged with it, ultimately writing a contribution to the critique of Hegel's philosophy of right. From this perspective, the philosophy of right serves as one of Marxism's theoretical sources. All right, this concludes our introduction to the philosophy of right. Reading notes are below the audio. We'll see you next time.